This is a little bit last minute, but I'm doing a research on Prevent, and particularly the Prevent duty and how it's impacting on higher education institutions. And so obviously, many people have talked about the Prevent duty and how this has kind of escalated the kind of referrals to channel. I mean, David mentioned earlier in the previous session about the number of referrals to channel in terms of children in the last year since the Prevent duty has been implemented. Now, today what I want to talk about is how this Prevent duty, paying due regard to prevent people being drawn into terrorism, has had an impact on universities in terms of what they do. And what I'll argue is I think that the Prevent duty is fundamentally incompatible with what the universities are there to do, what they're to do in providing education, but also in a wider function of the university, which is that it's a kind of social space, it's a place for democratic engagement, and it's obviously a place of knowledge production. So, in terms of the kinds of, sort of initial impacts in the sort of last year since the Prevent duty has been into effect, it's kind of undermined sort of key areas of what universities do. And one of those key areas obviously is academic freedom. Now, what I was going to mention before is that actually universities are legally bound to protect academic freedom. So that's another legal duty that universities have. Equally, universities are bound by the Equality Act. So they should be performing their function to promote equality. So those two duties actually run counter to the Prevent duty. And I think that we should be holding universities to account on those other legal duties that they're supposed to be performing. But in terms of academic freedom, since the Prevent duty has been into effect, there's been a number of examples in which this has started to be eroded. Now, universities are rewriting their freedom of speech policies in line with making these, giving them institutions more control about what they can allow on campus. And this fundamentally erodes freedom of speech, academic freedom, and also the ability to organise different kinds of events. I mean, even before the Prevent duty was actually in effect, this conference 2 years ago was stopped taking place at Birkbeck. So a conference on Islamophobia and racism was not allowed, was banned at university, and that's quite serious. But there's been more examples of that. There was a conference in the University of Huddersfield on racism and Islamophobia that was cancelled, again, because of Prevent intervention. Now, it's not just the fact that these events are cancelled, although that's obviously outrageous, but it's also the process that runs up to those events being cancelled, and sometimes they're not cancelled. But if you want to organise, for example, an event on campus with speakers that are not at the university, you have to put in these speaker information forms. And this is basically a way in which the university creates, a database on these external speakers. Now, what they do with that database is open to question, and we should be asking the university, we should be putting subject access requests, if we've had to have an external request about ourselves, to find out what they're doing with that information, who are they sharing that information with, because the Prevent duty allows them to share it with external agencies, including law enforcement agencies. But also there's other processes that are being written in. So for example, one thing you'll see is the demand often to have what they call balancing speakers. And this is a policy that universities often use. Say if you were to organise an event around Prevent, they say, well, that's opposed to Prevent, that's critical of Prevent, they say, well, you need a balancing speaker, so you need someone who's pro-Prevent to show the other side of the argument. Now, there's some student unions where the university has demanded that they put a pro-Prevent speaker who is the Prevent coordinator for that area. Now, that person isn't a citizen who just happens to have the opinions of being pro-Prevent. That person is acting in a professional capacity. That is not a balancing speaker. That is having Prevent officials present and taking over student spaces. And so that's obviously very concerning. There's also web filtering, where certain websites are blocked. For example, the Cage website has been filtered at a particular university. And also in terms of actually what kind of research we do and the process of the research that we do. So if you're researching terrorism, some universities are requiring you to tell, if you're researching certain topics that might be of interest, you need to fill out certain forms that they've got that. And I've questioned and said, well, what do you do with that information? And they said, well, it's there to protect you. But and I say, well, how? And they say, well, because if the police come and say, well, we're concerned about this particular research, we can say, no, it's safe because it's on our list. And I said, well, what if it's the other way around? What if the police or another law enforcement agency or intelligence agency comes up and says, I want to know about this person's academic research. I'm not going to tell you why, but we've got reason that we need to know about that. What would you do? Would you hand it over? Absolutely. So, I mean, that is, a real infringement of the academic freedom principle. There's also issues to do with research that goes wider than the prevent duty, but about the relationship. Wow, okay, I knew this would happen. Right, okay. So, but the relationship between the security establishment and academia. So there's a research institute in Lancaster called CREST, which is funded entirely by the Security and Intelligence Agency, and that the nature of the research there is in fact, in getting funding from that particular institute, if you are to get research funded by that institute, you have to agree that any publication that you write, before you submit it to any journal or anywhere, goes to the nominated contact of the Security and Intelligence Agencies who can review and suggest edits and omissions, etc. So essentially, they've got editorial control over this academic research, and that's fundamentally incompatible with what academic, because it cannot be ever independent. You don't know what's admitted, and you can't critically assess it by the community of academics cannot assess what is the content of that research. Now, because I haven't got that much time, I think I'm just trying to think which bits I'm going to miss out. So then, yeah, and then the other area is obviously equality. I mean, obviously, prevent is a racist policy. And the equality duty holds universities to account, and holds universities are duty-bound to promote equality. So how do they, navigate through this? Now, one of the things that I've been looking at is actually what have universities done to be compliant with their equality duty when they were writing up their prevent duties. And the results that I found is they've actually done very, very little. For example, not many universities are carrying out equality impact assessments before they wrote out their prevent policies. But also that actually, the prevent training that they provide runs counter to those duties. I've seen a lot of prevent training that says rely on your instincts. And it's like, well, what instincts are they? Are common sense racist instincts? And so that's very concerning, but also some of the examples in which they use. I mean, you said that how they've expanded it to look at different forms of extremism, but even still, there is a kind of clear, sort of racist portrayal. Yeah. But also, what was I saying? Okay, so I was going to give some examples of this prevent training. But I mean, you've given some examples. Can I go to the next slide? So this is, for example, a slide from training provided in a university in the Southwest. Now, these are sort of behaviours that we should look out for. Quick to anger, intolerant, closed-mindedness, an attitude to women, verbose, isolated, physical change, clothing or tattoos, spreading messages, overt new religious practices, change in attitude, non-attendance, fallen work standard, disengagement, and then asking questions around certain topics. At a university, that's what we're supposed to try and do. But the thing that's, we can laugh at that, but that is, kind of really concerning. But the next bit, if you could go, these are the kinds of people that are supposed to be drawn into this work. And if you look at that, it is everyone within the university. It's peers, it's housing reps, it's society representatives. So it's bringing the whole framework of the institution, of the university, into this prevent work. And in terms of things like equality provision, in terms of things like freedom of speech, they're trying to rewrite those things in prevent terms. More and more equality and diversity officers within the university are also prevent leads. That's a contradiction, that's a conflict of interest. Those two cannot form the same function. And this is who you could refer these people to. This is another example of JISC, which is the sort of online provider of university. So it might be, if you work in a university, some email account run by them. But they're under contract with the Home Office to deliver this prevent training. And I've been through this prevent training. If you go to the next slide. You want to go to the next one? So this is one of the examples. This is a quote that they provide. I truly believe that terrorism, or rather the fear of terrorism, is a tool used by governments to curtail our personal and civic freedoms, using lethal violence if necessary. It's a way of criminalising people whom they see as dangerous for holding views different from the status quo. Believe me when I tell you that this is the greatest and most subtle threat to all our freedoms and must be resisted at all costs, by all means. Now, basically, so the trainer said this was shocking. Yeah. This quote was shocking, and also that I'm sorry if this upsets some of you. And then it was suggested that you should challenge such statements if they're made, and that if they feel awkward, they should refer it to a manager. Now, this is an example of the way in which there is this prevent training is trying to push out critical voices, particularly those that are critical of government policy. And within universities, all these new institutional changes that have come as a result of the prevent policy enables them to do that and makes it they're trying to make it much harder for people to organise politically and critically within the institution. And that's in terms of both academic research as well as other sorts of activities that take place on a university campus. So what I would argue is that we should be engaging in a struggle to defend the space of the university as a critical space for these kinds of discussions, hold political meetings and not accept their kind of balancing speakers and the infringements on our freedom of speech. And also to use the framework of rights within universities to hold them to account, to protect our freedoms and say that actually they should be compliant with these duties too, because they're just as important, legally bound, they're just as legally bound to the equality duty as they are to the prevent duty. And then also just to defend the ethical principles of our profession. Prevent is fundamentally incompatible with our kind of relationship with our students as educators, with our ethos as researchers, and so we should actually defend those principles too.